Morning, Robert.
Morning, Mom. How the heck are you?
I'm a heckin' great.
Great.
Were you expecting anything else?
No.
I will have you know that I've had some comments where people are like, tell Robert to let you be goofy.
Yeah, but like the goofy, it's constant, but which isn't a bad thing.
Oh, I know.
But they're like, I'm never like not letting you be goofy.
I know.
Okay.
I know. It just said there's a time and a place for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally
think
get that.
I think sometimes it's just we don't match each other's like wavelengths of energy.
Oh, yeah.
Where especially on Sundays where I'm a little bit more reserved and like relaxed, and you've got like chat calls it zoomies. Whenever I have zoomies, you just have a lot of zoomies.
See, I look at it as like I start ramping up for my week coming. So I'm like planning things. I'm like mentally like pumping myself up.
Sure.
So that's where it's not like a I get what you're saying, because a lot of times with zoomies, like remember when you would have to go to the hospital because your asthma was kicking up and I'd be super tired and I'd have like this alter ego. I think that's what you're relating it to, but whereas where I'm relating it to, it's more like, okay, girl, yeah, I come up with all these fresh ideas and I get super excited.
No, I would say I agree with the latter, not the you're tired, because I think you like you say, you ramp up your weekday starting on Sunday. Mine ramps up Monday morning, and so we're just on two different energy schedules. Yeah. So it's nothing bad, but just know that I don't like. After the podcast ends, I don't like shun you to the closet so you can't like express yourself.
In off subject, and I think that this is really important, but you and I did have this discussion from last weekend, and it really helped me understand where you're at energy wise. So I feel like this weekend I have made more of a concerted effort to be aware, to be respectful of your energy level.
Sure.
Whereas I'm like, instead of me being like in your face, I'm just like, you know what, Lonnie, chill.
Yeah.
So communication is the key.
There you go.
All right. So what are we talking about
this week? I am sharing, and I think like there's a lot of things we could be talking about, but I think this one stands out the most because it's been happening a lot to I think just me and in general. But my topic this week is going to be called trauma dumping.
Oh.
And so basically what it is, it's when you go in and you basically just spill your guts to somebody. It may be voluntarily, it might be, involuntarily, but it's when they just kind of like throw up on you. And it's mentally very tiring. And lately it's been happening a lot, and not a lot, but it happened last night, and it kind of threw me off for a funk. And, it was a friend who joined a call with me, and he was just talking about like, everybody's going up to visit my buddy for a surprise party on the 30th. And, he's going to go there, and his ex is also going to be there. And then he starts like talking about all this like drama and trauma and things like that. Things that like, I think he's overestimating how much drama there's going to be. And so he just started like throwing up all of these emotions, and I'm just over here just trying to relax and things like that. And he had said some things that really upset me. And so I wanted to talk this week about the difference between oversharing, like trauma dumping, and then just venting.
Okay.
So that'll be my difference. And I think especially too, because you're in the limelight, I'm also, in a position where people just come in and they express their feelings. Like I remember when I was a notary, people would just tell me shit because they were just like, oh, well, I won't see him again, so I can just throw up on him.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And it's a really interesting distinction between,
I'm going to grab it. Keep talking. I just want to grab a pen and paper.
Yeah. Between venting and like actually like doing some sort of like, I would even call it a little bit of mental and emotional damage. I'm breathing. I'm trying to talk. So what I did is I pulled up this article from bannerhealth.com, and it says, you think you're venting, but you might be trauma dumping. And it says, maybe when you're talking to a new colleague, you overshare details about a fight with your partner. Perhaps a friend mentions a health struggle, and you interrupt and you interpret and tell reading's hard. And you interrupt and tell a long story about your mother's battle with cancer without letting your friend talk. It could be that you post an impulsive rant on Facebook about an argument with one of your coworkers, or you post repeatedly about the same personal situations. Maybe someone even says, I don't need to hear about this, or you don't have to tell me this, and you continue talking. And it says, in situations like these, you may feel like you're venting or turning to the other person for support, but you may actually be trauma dumping. So there's the distinction. And I've always been one to like really not tote the line, but I've always been really careful when people bring situations and things like that to my attention. I don't ever want to like be like, oh, well, like I understand what you're saying, and now here's my story. Sometimes I would say things because they correlate, and I just want them to know they're not alone. But there is I think there is a pretty big distinction between venting and trauma dumping, and it says.
Now, can I interrupt?
Shoot.
Do you think the difference is because I'm trying to like kind of like I'm trying to figure it out in my mind.
Yeah.
Now, venting. So venting is like having a conversation where both people can engage. Now, is trauma dumping more where it's like, I don't care about your feelings about this. I'm just going to tell you everything.
I think it's a little bit of, honestly, I think it's a little bit of like narcissistic behavior where it's so much like, hey, I have a problem. And you're like, well, you have a problem. I've got a problem. And then they start like jumping that on.
Oh, so it's more like having a conversation with somebody and you're telling them like, hey, you know what, this just happened to me. And they're like, well, you know, and they have to one up you. There's
different situations. So, okay. So like, for example,
see, cause I'm just trying to, to figure out the difference between
let me show, well, I'm going to continue reading the article, but let me show you the example. So it'd be like, I would come in and make oatmeal, right? And then you're like, so this happened. And then you start telling me these problems. And I'm like, oh, So that I think is a form of, not to an extreme, but trauma dumping. But then also to you're like, hey, do you have a second? I have this problem. And then you tell me your problem. And then I think it's more venting. Yeah.
So it's more of how it's more of like, kind of like what I said, like venting is like more of like a conversation where
both parties are engaged.
And the other one, and again, is like, I don't care about your feelings. I'm just going to tell you what's going on in my life.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what I said.
I said it better. So this one says, to continue on the article, says Tyler Jones, MD, Chief Medical Officer at Banner Behavioral Health Hospital, says explained more. It says venting and trauma dumping aren't clinical terms. They are words used to describe social dynamics, he said. And to a certain extent, whether you're venting or trauma dumping depends on the listener and how you feel about what you are sharing. But there are some key differences. And now here's the difference. It says venting. It says when you're venting, you share your frustrations with someone you trust to reduce your stress. You're intentional about what you share and aware of that you're venting. You may say something like, can I just vent for 5 minutes? Whereas trauma dumping, it says, with trauma dumping, you overshare difficult or intimate personal information without the other person's consent or during inappropriate times.
Okay.
You don't consider how your words impact the listener, and you're not open to advice or solutions. So there's two different, I said, there's two different distinctions. Whereas, like, again, we'll use the oatmeal for an example, where you're like, hey, I've got this problem. Can I run it by you? Sure, absolutely. And then versus, so this happened, and then blah, 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 blah. You know, there's that. I think a lot of it has to do with consent, really, honestly.
Absolutely. And now do you have more? Because I don't want to jump too ahead.
You're okay. Yeah.
So here's where I think it's interesting, because you always have an issue of like feeling like you're not heard. And I think trauma dumping triggers that, because it's like your time and your space and your energy is not being accounted into this equation.
Absolutely. I would completely agree with you. Okay. It's almost like my time isn't as valuable as yours, and you're taking my time because you think your problems are more important. I'm not signaling you out. I'm just saying.
No. I totally get that.
And that happens sometimes, like with Twitch. I'll be streaming and I'm like, hey man, how's it going? And they're like, well, and then they go on this huge, like they do this huge info dump about like what's going on in their life. And so there's a very distinct line between being caring and being supportive, and then me being a punching bag for you just to vent. And you know, I think Twitch and social media absolutely is abused by people who take that opportunity to trauma dump onto somebody. Instead of being like, hey, like I've got this problem, I don't know who to talk to. Then I could be like, hey, you know, if you're close with me, let me know. We'll talk later, or things like that. Or, hey, you know, reach out to somebody or talk to a friend, and then, you know, maybe talk to them instead of like, so-and-so broke up with so-and-so, and then I feel like this, my job's like this. And like, if I don't give you that opportunity to express yourself, then that's a line to, don't tell me.
Yeah. Because your platform really isn't geared up for.
It's not my job.
Yeah.
I'm playing video games and I'm here to entertain people. I'm not your psychologist.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
So here's just like a random thought, but if somebody is on a rant and they're trauma dumping and you feeling it like it's starting to affect your energy, is there anything like you can have, like maybe like a sound effect that's going to like...
No, I just tell them straight up no.
Okay.
I've gotten very comfortable with telling people no. Like, for example, there's this guy, he's been like donating me just a lot of. He gave me like $100 on Friday.
Wow.
But he's kind of weird, and a Monday if he keeps being a problem, just be like no, and we're stopping it.
Is he just overstepping his bounds, or?
I think people assume that because I'm streaming online, I have a dollar amount. I like they feel like they're entitled. You know, it's a lot like
they're
it's a lot
buying
like
your time.
They're
buying your energy.
They're not so much that, but they think they own me kind of thing. You know, because they're like, well, I gave you this amount of money. And every time I do it, I always feel like that, you know, Bane on The Dark Knight. When he goes, I've given you a small fortune. He was like, and he gives you power over me. And that's exactly how it is. And so like, you know, he hasn't done anything. We actually have one of Ahmad's like deep dive. He's like this 17-year-old kid. I'm going to have to ban anyway, but it's just, I was upset about that. And so I was talking to my mods, and there wasn't a trauma dump, but we were having a discussion and we were venting.
Yeah.
I don't know why I brought that up, but
you know what's really weird is that kind of reminds me of like when we were working for the Grapeline, like people would be like really super rude to me, then think it was okay because they were going to
give
tip
me money.
Yeah. And I was just like, keep your damn money.
Yeah.
I don't want your money. I have more self-respect than that.
Yeah.
So to me, but here's a kind of playing a devil's advocate, Robert, is, you know, there's definitely a fine line of like, don't disrespect me just because you're giving me money.
Yeah.
But also too, I was very ego driven back then too. And I'm like, I'm doing this job, but I'm just as good as you. So you kind of have to like make sure that you're, you know, because you are, I mean, truthfully, you are in the public's eye. And you know what? And there are going to have to be times where you're going to have to be like, you know what? I'm in the public's eye, you know, people, I'm entertaining people, and maybe I can like soften up that stance a little bit, but never to the point where you feel uncomfortable about it.
Yeah, well, that's the thing though, and like one guy, I mean, that's the thing though, is like I think he gave me like $80 or something like that. Is my integrity worth $80? And I think it's worth a lot more.
Well, is he asking you to do something that?
No, he's just. Well, you know what? I will say that somebody had made a joke. They're like, "Oh, he's your sugar daddy," and I was like, "Nobody's my fucking sugar daddy," and that's the one that I think that triggered me. Yeah. And so
I can't see
it's at 12:24.
12:35,
Yeah.
okay.
And nobody's my sugar daddy, and that's what triggered me, is to think that somebody had power over me.
See, but here's the thing: is like, let me deep dive again. It's like, I wouldn't take it out on him.
No.
Just because somebody said something that.
Well, he had brought
triggered
it up a couple of times, so he was like, "Oh, well, can I get a role in Discord, like a sugar daddy role?" And I said, "No."
Yeah, well, then that's definitely,
Yeah.
you know, and again, you know, this is like a new territory for you, to where you're going to be having to come up with these kind of boundaries. So it's kind of, it's really interesting to see that develop.
Yeah. Well,
And-
I think honestly, I think the reason it bugged me so much is because we had talked about setting boundaries, and I think I had let him overstep that boundary, and it triggered me. And so Monday, I'm not mad at the kid, you know, just because he just doesn't know, but I'm going to definitely make sure that those boundary lines are set.
Yeah, and that's just what I was going to say. It's just, I personally would just make sure that you don't take it out on him.
Yeah.
But just make sure that your boundaries are clear set and that you're comfortable with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So continuing on the trauma dumping, it says, people who trauma dump tend to have intense feelings, express emotion exclusively, and share indiscriminately. In some instances, you could have an underlying problem such as borderline personality disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, or depression that affects your behavior. However, oftentimes that is not the case. And then it says, how does trauma dumping harm relationships? And it says, this way of relating with others can be counterproductive or destructive to your relationships, says Dr. Jones. When you trauma dump, it feels awkward, so other people may limit their interactions with you. Listeners can feel anxious or stressed when you overshare this way. It says, you may not allow the other person to interject, offer solutions, or share their own troubles. In some cases, people perceive trauma dumping as manipulative. They see it as a way to gain sympathy or avoid critique, Dr. Jones says. So it's very interesting when it's like that.
Yeah, because what the note that I put down is a lot of times I think these people feel invisible and they have to just like overshare to get even any sort of like little bit of spotlight or any sort of little like recognition.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. Is like maybe they just don't have that avenue to vent. And when somebody gives them that opportunity, they just explode.
Right.
You know, also too, it could be like they says, it could be very manipulative.
That's why I'm saying it's like sometimes they feel invisible. And, you know, to me, it's like, they overshare in a manipulative way to get that attention.
I think it's more narcissistic than anything.
Okay.
I think it's that they want to be the center of attention, and they want their problems to be on the forefront. They want the spotlight.
Yeah.
So I think it's two different distinctions, but I think both have the same outcome.
Yeah, because I'm trying to like correlate this with my platform, but my platform's completely different than yours. I'm like, I think maybe sometimes, well, I don't think I overshare, but I'm very transparent about my life.
Sure.
Which opens up people to be transparent about their lives. But I don't think I've ever run across anything where people, well, maybe I have, where they've done it in more of a in a trauma dumping way, or
maybe
if they do, maybe I'll just glance right over it.
Yeah, or just be like, hey, this isn't the platform for you to share that information.
Yeah.
That's the thing though too, isn't it? Maybe that's why I picked this topic this week, is because I want to make sure that people aren't abusing the platform that I've created in order for them to manipulate into something that's not,
right,
or to turn it into something that it's not.
Right. Is there any more for the article? Because I do have a couple of questions.
Yeah, you can go ahead and ask if you want.
No. I mean, I would, because one of them I think has to do with like more of like a solution. So.
Okay, so this one, there's a couple of things.
Okay.
So this next one says, how can I tell if you are trauma dumping? And it says, consider the effect of your communication. Think about how others may receive the information you're sharing, Dr. Jones says. This is recognize that potential impact helps determine if it's the right setting or if the relationship is appropriate for the level of personal detail. Pay attention to why you are sharing, whether you are giving the other person a chance to reciprocate, ask questions, or provide feedback. And then it says, how can you transition trauma dumping to venting? And it says, it is important to transition and not clam up completely, Dr. Jones said. Sharing your negative experiences and emotions is a good thing. It can help you process them and move forward. However, it's crucial to consider who you share with. And it says, therapy is always an option to help. Understand and navigate emotional hardships, Dr. Jones said. Therapy can help address the triggers of trauma dumping, including the feelings that may be related to the trauma itself or the dynamic that's driving you to share information this way. It says, if you find that you are prone to trauma dumping, you can examine your relationships, identify what triggers your difficult emotions and your desire to overshare, and ask yourself why it's important to share this information or what you hope to gain from it. And then it says, you can set personal boundaries and only discuss certain topics with people closest to you, who you trust the most, and who you have asked about sharing this type of information, Dr. Jones said. So I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
And then, I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to say, because to me, I think there's two different types of trauma dumping, and this is just my opinion.
Sure.
I think there's the narcissistic type that does it kind of maliciously. And then I also think that there's sometimes people trauma dump because they just have this sense of like helplessness. And they just are like,
Or they may just be completely unaware. Some people just lack social cues.
Exactly.
So, I mean, it's not like there's, it's such an interesting thing between like, hey, can you help me with something, versus like, hey, this is what's happening.
Right.
And I don't think people are socially aware enough to tell the difference.
Right.
Really, honestly.
Yeah, because I try to like correlate this like in my own life. And the only thing that I could think of is like when I was getting ready to like end my marriage, I felt like I was trauma dumping on everybody because I was just like blindly just like, like searching for the answer. So, it's just, to me, it's like, again, I think there's that fine line between, like you said, being a narcissist and then just like being like, I am so in need of an answer. I'm just going to like tell everybody my problems to get that answer.
You were probably so starved of
attention.
Not so much attention, but you were so starved of having that outlet to vent. So it could have just been, you opened up the floodgates and then, you just couldn't stop yourself. Yeah. So I don't think it's as clear cut as like 2 or 3 different reasonings. I think people just are, for the most part, just either socially unaware or they just don't know how to vent properly. And then it says, how can you deal with trauma dumping as a listener? It says, you may notice you feel overwhelmed by the information, have difficulty responding to one-sided conversation, or don't have the chance to share your own experiences. In these situations, it is best to let the person know what you feel, when you feel activated by the information or delivery, Dr. Jones said. Plan how you'll say no and address your concerns that the conversation is not helpful for you. You can also mention that trauma dumping may not be helpful for the other person either. And so that's really interesting, because I should have, yesterday when the guy was trauma dumping, I should have just been like, you know what, dude, like this isn't the right outlet. Or like, hey, you know what, I don't have any information to give you. I can't help you. Instead, I just let him kind of like use me as a sounding board, and it ended up being more harmful than good. Because, I don't think it mattered to him, but it made me feel really bad.
Again, it's going back to setting those boundaries.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I could have been like, hey, like, let's, we can talk about something else. Or, if I did really, because he was like, you want to talk on Discord? I was like, sure. And to be honest with you, I really didn't even want to. I just wanted to relax. And I was like, all right, I haven't talked to him in a while. And I had known that he's that kind of person when it comes to trauma dumping. So I could have just been like, no, we're good.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, it comes back to boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because that's interesting, because one of my questions from the get-go was, how do you protect yourself?
Yeah. And I think it just comes down to boundaries.
Right.
And
being able to say no.
Being like, hey, I'm not comfortable with you sharing this information to me, or, hey, this isn't relevant to like what we're talking about, or, hey, let's put a pin on this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to.
Yeah, because and going back to the very beginning, and this is like, I don't want to get like super like, oh, this is, when people say they're an empath, kind of drives me a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
Okay.
But that is a trait of being an empath, where people just tell you the most random things, to where you walk away and you're like, why would anybody share that information with me?
I don't know.
And it happened to Barbu. It's happened to me my entire life, and it's happening to you. So you basically have to build up your defenses of like, because otherwise people are going to continue to just do this.
No, I don't. I think it's about setting boundaries.
That's why I said you have to set up your defenses. You have to be like, I'm not comfortable with this. I mean, if you're comfortable with them sharing it, then that's great. If not, then you're going to have to, again, set up your defenses of like your boundaries of, no, this ain't the conversation for me.
Well, I think it comes back down to the addiction of like people pleasing. I think addicts have a hard time saying no to people. And I think a lot of times people understand that you don't say no, or that you're there for, like, hey, do you have a moment? Hey, do you have this? Hey, do you have that? And you're just constantly giving.
Right.
And you're not receiving anything. And I think it's mentally draining.
See, and where your growth is, where I've seen, and I don't ever want to tell you how you feel, because it's not my place. But that's why I'm saying it's like these kind of things where people are trauma dumping on you, they're triggering you for people not respecting your time.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have a tendency when that happens to get really sharp, kind of like almost angry, like you retaliate because you want to take that power back.
Yeah.
And that's why I was just saying, like, when these instances happen, definitely stand up for yourself. But I would recommend not retaliating with anger, because you're the one that didn't set your boundaries. See what I mean?
In what example?
Well, for example, like for yesterday, like with that guy who was trauma dumping, if he comes back, I just don't want it to be where you're like, I didn't set these boundaries with this guy, so I'm going to like set these huge boundaries and come across really like aggressive.
Okay.
Because sometimes to me, and I'm not saying this is what you do, but sometimes for me, like if I get triggered by something, I come back with anger.
Sure.
Because anger makes me feel like I'm taking my power back.
Okay.
So for me, that's something that I'm learning how to do, is like, I can still vocalize how I feel. I can still regain my power without adding that element of anger.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to share that with you, because sometimes I see, like, for example, for us, like if I were to trauma dump on you when you're getting your oatmeal, instead of you saying, no, this is not the time or the place, you come back with just, you're mad at me.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to tell you to work on. It's like, just try to, because you are in the public eye, it's like, just make sure that when you do come back, you just come back with, not super angry.
Okay. I understand what you're trying to say. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But also to the same time, I find sometimes, like, I think meeting people, I think setting an example, I think also helps out too.
Yeah, I mean, it's your universe, and you control that however you want. I'm just trying to just kind of play the devil's advocate of the person. Being on the other end of your anger isn't always the most enjoyable,
sure,
because you have a strong personality, and so I'm just trying to be a devil's advocate and just be like, hey, you have more power than you think, and when you unwield it, it's pretty harsh.
I can agree.
So,
Well, that too. But when I burn a bridge, it's gone.
oh, you don't burn it. You blow that.
Yeah.
You
So,
blow it up.
Yeah, and I think yeah, so like the guy, he's very, I don't want to say manipulative, but he's very like, hey, how come we don't talk anymore? I miss you. Like, what's going on? And like things like that. And so that I'm already triggered.
Yeah.
And then having him on top of that makes it like, oh, okay, well, we're good.
Yeah.
So like, but like, I don't think that person deserves my energy and time. And I think it comes back down to, again, that like, hey, my time is valuable. And when you trauma dump, you're taking my time.
Yeah. But the important thing, well, one of the things is like, you just have to, and you're learning and you are growing, but you have to, there's like a missing piece. And that missing piece is like, hey, where have you been? I miss you. Let's talk on Discord. That missing piece is like, no, dude, I got things I got to do.
You mean in terms of venting, or what do you mean?
You stopping that trauma dumping
before it happens.
Or if you don't catch it before it happens, being able to pump the brakes and just be like, whoa, nope, we're good.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like you say, it all comes back down to boundaries.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I just have to be less, no, I don't want to say I don't have to start being less accommodating, but I have to understand people, chances are, if it, he follows a very similar mindset or the similar kind of pathing. So like, I know if it's a private call, he's probably going to try to trauma dump. So I'm gonna say, no, we're okay. We're good. I heard this really cool quote on TikTok from 50 Cent of all people. But he said that if his grandfather had a saying that says, if it slithers like a snake and it bites like a snake, is it a snake or do you need to be bit?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like, it kind of makes sense because I saw the pattern, right? And so like the fact that was like, oh, well, of course he's going to do this kind of thing. And next time I just need to make more clear cut boundaries. Be like, no, dude, we're good. Or, hey man, like, I don't want to talk about this. And
see, because sometimes I think you get frustrated with yourself
for not saying no,
for not saying something.
Absolutely.
So it like you switch it and you're like, plunk, and then that's where your anger comes in, and truthfully, and I mean, just relating that to myself, that's how I would feel like I was taking my power back.
Sure.
Was by look at what I can do. I can just be the world's meanest person. Now I have my power back. But it is just, to me, it's more like just being like, well, Lonnie, you know what? You missed that one, but you'll catch it on the next one, and just kind of forgiving myself more for not setting those boundaries than being angry that it happened.
Yeah. I would say similar. I would say that I feel more towards like, oh, well, I'm never going to feel this way again when it comes to letting this person overstep my boundary. Yeah. So I think about it like that way. Like I'm not going to give anybody that much wiggle room or that much power over me anymore. Yeah. So that's kind of how I go with it.
Just, and just as a mom, I'm just going to interject, just make sure that you're compassionate. You give yourself some self-compassion. If you don't set that boundary and something like that does happen, just make sure that what you're telling yourself isn't something like, like you shouldn't have let that happen or you should have caught that. Just be like, you know what? I didn't catch it. I don't like this feeling and I'm going to try harder next time.
I definitely think a harder approach. I think I definitely take a much harder approach on that.
But this is called self-love and self-compassion. Why can't you give yourself more self-love and self-compassion? I mean, there's a time and a place for everything. It reminds me of that scene on the movie Doom with The Rock where the guy makes a noise and he pulls out the knife. He's like, and he cuts himself. You just have to make sure you're not an emotional cutter. I mean, you're allowed to give yourself a pass. You're allowed to give yourself, I'm just saying, it's like you're allowed to give yourself a little bit of just like, hey, dude, it's okay. You missed it, but it's okay. And you get the same result, but in a softer kind of way towards yourself.
Yeah, but I think also too, but like in the same mindset, but like, oh, well, this is how I learn. Like, we won't do this again kind of thing. Instead of being like, it's all right. Like, I don't like how I'm feeling and I'm not going to feel that again. Okay. Kind of thing.
I'm not going to tell you how you feel, but I'm just, it's the one thing, like, for me, it's like, I don't always have to be mad at myself.
Yeah, I'm not mad. I'm not mad because people overstep my boundary, but I'm also not going to let it happen again. Okay. So I
respect you for the way that you have your own emotions.
Thank you. Okay, so to end the article, it says venting is a healthy way to share negative emotions and reduce stress, but with trauma dumping, you overshare in a way that makes the listener feel overwhelmed or ignored. If you feel your conversations lean toward trauma dumping and you'd like to get help from a behavioral health professional, reach out to Banner Health. So that's the end of the article. But I thought it was really interesting because it wasn't until really recently that I really understood the transition or the difference between trauma dumping and venting.
Right.
Because it kind of points out how often people do trauma dump, versus actual venting. Like, hey man, I have a problem. Can you help me out? Versus like, oh, this is how my day's going.
Yeah. See, I think venting and trauma dumping are almost the exact same thing. It's just how it triggers the individual who's hearing it.
I don't know.
One's with respect and one's not with respect.
I think the person who is trauma or talking either, like you say, has or doesn't has respect.
Yeah.
Because if I have respect with you, I'm going to listen to your input. And if I don't, I'm just going to keep talking.
Right. See, now here's just a thought, and this is just a random thought. You don't have to do it. But if you're on your live stream and somebody starts trauma dumping, do you think you could just have like a silly sound, like a honking of a horn and just... Okay.
No, I think a much sterner. I think because of the anonymity of the internet, I think it's much easier to set those boundary lines, and so they're not misinterpreted. Okay. Because the way I think people perceive things online and things like that, I think people are like, oh, well, he didn't really mean it, or like, oh, that was like, if it's like a horn or something like that, I don't want it to be a gimmick, and I just want to be like, hey, we're not talking about this. And if they continue, then we take repercussions.
Like I said, it's your universe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought it was important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and again, I mean, yeah, I want you to be okay. And so whatever form or fashion that you need to do to not feel invisible, I say 100% you have to do it. And I'm really proud of you for taking those steps, because that's the difference between now and a year ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a lot different, versus like people like coming in and they're like, oh my God, I have this problem. I'm like, okay, let's solve it.
Yeah.
Versus people coming in and like, oh my God, this and this and this happened. Like, hey, this isn't the right mindset.
Right.
Like, hey, this isn't what this platform's for.
Yeah.
And I think, and I also, it's a lot like I picture it like a lot like a restaurant or a store. Mm-hmm. People just come in, they're like, oh my God, I want this, I want that, I want this. And we're like, well, I don't sell that. We have this product, and my product is positive vibes and just a place where you can like, come in and hang out. I'm not your therapist, and I don't need people coming in and giving me their problems.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, hopefully you can just absolutely start doing, just stopping it before it upsets you. Because I mean, truthfully, at the end of the day, the most important thing is that you're the one that got upset.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because they don't care.
They don't care.
They're not upset. It's perfectly fine. Like, I'm sure the guy's probably like, didn't think anything of it. Mm-hmm. And here it is, kind of making me all cheesed and all bummed.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And again, I just, you can just be like, ain't going to happen again. Here's my boundaries, and then just let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. That's all you can do.
All you can do, Robert.
Yeah.
So I am going to be talking next week, and I'm going back and forth between two subjects. So I'm not, you know what, maybe I'll do 3, and I'll put a poll out, and then that's the one I'll talk about. But it for sure will be interesting.
And then,
Yeah.
I was going to say at the end of the month, we'll have to record a little earlier next time, but that's not for a couple more weeks.
Okay.
So I was just thinking out loud.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
awesome.
Usually I'm available for recording.
Cool.
All right. So if you want to check out Robert's platform, he is Robert Pike on Instagram, and then he is Surebert, SUREBERT, on TikTok, Twitch, and YouTube. And I am gray hair and tattoos across the board.
Cool.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks for listening. Have a great week. And we will be back next week.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Bye.